Okay, so when should you take the SAT or ACT, and how many times should you take the test? In our last video, I talked about a student that I'd worked with in the past. She waited until August to take what should have been her highest scored SAT because she'd scored so high on it in the past. So she thought it was going to be pretty easy to crack 1500. And then when the test came back, she hadn't. And she basically had to forego an ED option completely. She's at a very good school right now, but it still kind of sucked that she didn't get that ED option. So first things first, how many times should you take the SAT or ACT? I would recommend not taking it more than 3 times for a few reasons. First off, schools like Georgetown require you to send them every single test. And while that's not very common, it still happens. And if you end up deciding to apply to one of those schools and you've taken the test like 10 times, it's not going to look good. Also, what are you doing taking the SAT 10 times? That's not a practice test and it's expensive. And the time that you spend studying and just having the SAT on your mind would be better spent studying for your AP exams or your classes in general. You could be spending that time, pursuing a self-directed passion project, or just investing in your extracurriculars in general, applying to research and internship programs over the summer, community service. I could go on. And again, it's a waste of money. If you're not scoring consistently in your target range on practice tests, and I mean weekly, timed practice tests, you're probably not going to score at your target on the actual test. So as for a timeline, I think here's a pretty good plan for any student. The first test that you take should be in August after your sophomore year. You can, use the summer to study, maybe take some kind of SAT prep or like boot camp. Just a side note, if you are planning on being recruited for a sport, you can take the test a little bit earlier. Most colleges, though, will otherwise want to see a score from junior or senior year, or at least that's what they recommend. There's no sense rushing to take it too early if you're not going to do that well on it. Point number 2, don't take it, like I said, unless you're consistently scoring 10 to 30 points above the score that you're aiming for. That means on at least 3 practice tests in a row, again, you're taking these weekly, you are carving out 2 hours and 30 minutes just to account for 5-minute breaks in between sections every single week. I've had students push back on this before and say can't I just take this section of the test, take another module, on the bus or something? And no, I would recommend that you simulate the testing condition as well as you can. Wake up early in the morning if you have to take it then, because that's probably when you're going to be registered to take it. And if you've already registered for a test and you're not scoring 10 to 30 points above your target range, you might not be ready for it and it's worth rescheduling. Okay, so now let's say you've taken the test in August and you get your results back and you don't really like the number that you see. Maybe you were nervous on test day, maybe they just had more material that are targeted at your weak points. The next step is to map out 2 to 3 months that lead up to an official test that for those 2 to 3 months, you have the least amount going on in your life. And I really want you to look at your calendar and think about what's happening every single month. Do you have specific commitments that always come up during that time of year? Are you going to be working on, applications for summer programs or summer internships? When are your midterms? Are you going to be studying for those? If you're part of a sport, when is your season? And how many hours do you have to commit to that sport during, however many weeks the season lasts? When I say 2 to 3 months, I mean you want 2 to 3 months that you can carve out of your schedule, 8 hours a week for taking, practice tests and studying about 30 minutes to an hour every single day on specific subject points that you realize that you just repeatedly miss questions on. Again, the hope is that you just get an amazing score in August and then you never have to think about it again. Because my advice is always get the test out of the way as soon as you can. Even if a school is test optional, I'd really recommend reading into why Dartmouth decided to reinstate the SAT. Even though schools did say that going test optional wouldn't affect your chances of admission, there were clearly some cases where a good score was the difference between a student being admitted and being rejected. If your current application doesn't really show enough academic rigor, maybe something happened sophomore year, especially if it's something that can be explained, that makes your academic record not look as good, There's a chance that a high SAT score could be the difference between being admitted and being rejected. And again, there were some students who went test optional and they were still admitted. I'm sure they had outstanding GPAs and other resume items. In my opinion, it's best to get a killer SAT or ACT score, and then feel confident when you submit your application with the test score included.